Right. So we were speaking about this big idea, just to recap quickly, that the body and all of its parts, all of its compartments, really can serve as a vehicle either for holiness or, God forbid, for the opposite. And we decide really who's going to be in the driver's seat. If you remember the big idea, the idea, of course, the ideal is to have the soul, the divine soul, as the driver, and then the body is used to perform all that this divine soul desires. That was really this big idea. We said that the body is not a goal in and of itself, it's just a vehicle, if you recall. And now let's continue right here at the bottom of page 161, as you said, Margot. So does anyone want to read? The above constitute all the deeds. Anyone?
I'll read if nobody else wants to.
Thank you. Please do. Thank you. Go for it.
The above constitute all the deeds that are done under the sun. The deeds, words, and thoughts that constitute an actualization of the midot of the animal soul include not only things that are commonly considered evil, thoughts, words, and acts of anger, of doing others harm, of rebellion against God, and so on. But in fact, all the deeds that are done under the sun, an expression from Ecclesiastes 1:14, everything that is of the material world, everything that relates to the natural reality is included in the phrase under the sun.
Right. I just want to elaborate. I'm not going to deviate a little bit, but since he mentions this verse of all the deeds that are done under the sun, or in Hebrew, one of the more famous verses of King Solomon, particularly of Ecclesiastes. So the Talmud has something quite fascinating about this to say about this verse, and it says that all the deeds that are done under the sun. If you, by the way, this expression is used quite regularly in the in the book of Ecclesiastes of Kohelet. But the most famous of the verses that uses that expression is Ein Chadash Tachat Hashemesh, right? And this is also what this verse is alluding to. That's the context of this verse, that there's nothing new under the sun. Now, the Talmud says something quite fascinating, and it says that it's true. Under the sun, there is nothing new. But above the sun, much is new. Now, what does this mean? I don't know what it means astrologically. I'm no astronomer, and I really don't know. But Jordan, maybe you can elaborate on this. You're more of the astronomer than I am. But what it means, certainly spiritually, is that in this world, it's true, nothing much is new. Nothing indeed is new. You know, we say that history repeats itself. Rabbi Steinsaltz would say on another realm that he has yet to find a new sin. All the sins that he hears from all sorts of people, and that he's already sins that existed 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 3,000. Nothing new is under the sun. But above the sun, if one can elevate himself beyond his limits and reach a place that is almost impossible in his eyes, above the sun, then that's where you can start creating newness. That's when you can really make an impact, not just on yourself, but on the world around you. That's where your soul can finally not just be divine, but act divine in a place that's beyond limits, beyond any natural confinements. That's really what the idea is in the Talmud. But I think relating to this, we see that there are many deeds, like he says, that are done under the sun. Now we have to ask ourselves: are we going to just be robotic and do deeds that with nothing is new under the sun, or when we start the day and when we continue on with the day, are we going to follow? Are we going to do deeds that are revolutionary, that break our limits, that take us beyond our comfort zone, and that create really something new? Deeds that are above the sun, that can really create newness. That's the big question. But it's true. So just as it is true on the holy side, and as he says here, it's also true on the other side, Sitra Achra, that there are people. Look, it takes quite a lot of courage and quite a lot of wisdom to do evil, just as it does to do good. Especially if you want to do it in a smart way and not get caught and so on and so forth. It takes a lot of the same type of elements. The question is how you're going to use your body and how you're going to use those skills and talents. So we can use them to create something new, to go again beyond our limits and do something divine, or we can do something, God forbid, that's the opposite of that. That's the idea here. I'd love to hear your comments and questions and disagreements and so on. It's not just about me. Yes, Ronnie.
So I heard you say that there is nothing above the sun, there is newness. Under the sun, there is nothing. And the thought as I heard you talking that came to my mind is, do we need to go above the sun for the newness and then bring the newness back to earth, peace on earth? Is that when we have the newness? Because we need newness under the sun here on our planet. That's my first comment. Thoughts.
No, that's a good question. I think that when you go above the sun, in other words, when you really break your own limits, when you do something that is new above the sun, then I think the re-entry, to use that expression, right? The re-entry maybe happens by itself. And there's newness in the world that has been brought down thanks to you. I don't know if you have to re-enter. Maybe you have to be cognizant of re-entering the world all the time, not staying on a level that is too high, that you remain aloof. But I don't know if there's any. I think it depends on the deed. I don't know if there's really any type of action that a person must do in order to bring himself back. Depends on the deed. Certainly, I think if we're dealing with spiritual matters, like learning Torah, for example, right? That also can lead a person above the sun. If we break our own limits, the Talmud says, which means that there is no comparison between a person who studies a passage of the Torah 100 times to a person who studies a passage of Torah 101 times. What's the difference? 100 times is within our natural limits. 101 times is breaking those natural limits. Now, by the way, the Talmud there also brings the example of a donkey in the marketplace. Because a donkey in the marketplace, if you ask for a ride that is just 1 mil, which is maybe 1 mile, then it only costs 1 zuz, 1 coin. But if you ask him to go anywhere beyond that 1 mile, it costs 2 zuz. But why? He's only taking 1 step beyond 1 mile. That's because 1 mile is within the capability of the donkey. But any step beyond that is breaking his nature. So that is already worth much more, 2 zuz, 2 coins. But it's the same idea, right? Now, when dealing with spiritual acts like learning Torah, yes, I think you do need a mechanism to be able to come back, not to disconnect yourself altogether. It says in the Talmud that Ben Azai, was one of the great sages, would not be fruitful and multiply, would not marry. And they asked him, Ben Azai, you are the one who taught that whoever is not being fruitful and multiplying, then mema'et admut, he's diminishing the image of God in this world. But look at you. You don't get married. You don't have children. And he responded, what can I do? My soul desires to study Torah. So I don't have time to pay bills and to get married and to have children. So if you study Torah, I think spiritual acts, again, will demand a specific mechanism for you to force yourself to come back down. I think other than that, if you go beyond your limits to give tzedakah, I think newness has already been created. You don't need that same mechanism to really come back down. You create a newness in this world, even without disconnecting yourself from this world. So it depends on the mitzvah.
And as we approach Rosh Hashanah and we go within ourselves, is this not creating something new under the sun for ourselves personally? Is there a difference between something new for ourselves and something new for the world?
Right. That's a good question. I think that it depends what we do with that search, right? Once we find ourselves, what do we do with it? Because, as Rabbi Steinsaltz would famously say, and I have said this many times, that the most important question in life is, and then what? Ve'azma. What happens afterwards? So I found my divine self during this month, and I'm holding the king's hand who's in the field, smiling at me. But can I leave my hand in his hand? Can I continue to walk with him? Can I continue to to fulfill his desires, not just mine, my selfish ones, but my deepest desire, let's put it that way. So I think it depends on the then what question, right? What happens then?
Maybe.
Yeah.
And it was also interesting, you talked about wisdom. And so what I heard you say, and I've never thought about this, that there's godly wisdom and then there is animal wisdom.
Right. Well, stemming from the two souls, right? The godly soul and the animal soul. So we have those sources of wisdom speaking to us all day long, I think. I mean, at least me, I don't know. Some of you are completely righteous, so probably you only have the divine soul speaking to you. I have the divine soul and the animal soul speaking to me all day long. And the question is, who will allow to, which voice will prevail? Which voice will I be following? And the animal soul usually speaks, there's a great story that I wrote about. I don't know if I've ever shared it verbally, but about this father who wanted to teach his son one good life lesson before his bar mitzvah. So he took him to a boiling mikveh. Remember that story?
Mm-mm.
A boiling mikveh. And, going to a boiling mikveh is not an easy thing. He puts his foot in and it's boiling. He can't. But the father says to his son, persist on, don't worry. Go put on one foot first and then the second foot. So eventually the son dips into that boiling mikveh. At first he shouts, aye, it's too hot. But once he immersed himself in, he says to his father, this feels so good. I'm sure you've all had that experience, whether in the mikveh, in the jacuzzi, or a place like that. And his son comes out of the mikveh and the father says, that's the lesson I wanted to teach you before your bar mitzvah. That whenever you have an oi that precedes a you know that you're doing the right thing. But if it's the opposite way, if you have a instant gratification, you most probably will have an oi after that and then you'll know that you're doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
There's a dirty joke about that, but I'm not going to talk about that.
Oh, okay. Fine. You could if you want. But the idea is the same. So if I have an oi, if I labor for it, and that's usually the divine soul's voice. You have to work hard. It doesn't come instantly. Even though we live in an age where we want everything immediately. The new prayer in New York City is, do you know what the new prayer is? God, give me patience and give it to me now. But I know that's the animal soul speaking, but the divine soul knows that it's a hard way. Adam la'amal yulad, as Job says. And man was work to toil. And Pirkei Avot says, the ethics of our father says, lefum tzara agra. According to the suffering is the reward. Or in modern English, you would say no pain, no gain. But you need to work. That sometimes is why it's much easier to listen to the animal soul than to the divine soul. But we have to know the long term, even though there's an oi at the end, there'll be an and it's all worth the oi, or
Good.
bearing the oi. Yeah.
Rabbi, when King Solomon said these words, nothing new under the sun, what was the context in which that was stated? Like what surrounds that statement, that he made that statement?
Right. The context, I think, is the context of the entire book. It's quite a depressing book to say, to say it the way it is. Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, where, this is a man who, by the way, it's debatable. Rabbi Steinsaltz had his own opinions about this, but how old was King Solomon when he wrote this book? Many people say that he was already at the end of his life and he had seen it all. And, the wisest man also could analyze it all. And after seeing it all and analyzing it all, he realizes that there's really nothing new under the sun. Or as the Frenchies say, le plus ça change, le plus c'est la même chose. The more things change, the more things remain the same. And he said it from a very deep perspective of wisdom and of experience. So that's really the context of the book. That's the context of these verses. You know, it begins with Dor olech v'dor ba v'aretz lo'olam umadet. A generation comes and a generation goes, and the land, the earth, always remains the same, stays the same. There's many verses like that that speaks of this, this idea that there's no newness under the sun in Chadash Tachat HaShemesh.
King Solomon died when he was only 52 years old.
The book of Kohelet.
King Solomon died when he was,
When he was
52.
52 years old, right?
52.
Yeah, right. So he may have written it right then, but Rabbi Stans.
But he had many, many wives, and I think that's why he aged quickly.
It could be. How old were his wives when they died?
Yeah,
Does it
right.
go both ways? But look, King Solomon is known to write 3 books, and they're very different books. One is this book, the book of Ecclesiastes. The other book is the book of Proverbs, which is really a book of tremendous wisdom, Mishlei. Another book is the book of Song of Songs, which is a romance book, but holy romance, I would say. Now, it makes sense to say, and Rabbi Stans would not agree with this thesis, but it makes sense to say that he wrote the song books, the romance book, when he was a young teenager. That's when you're in that life. And then the book of wisdom when he was already in his midlife. And then book of Kohelet, again, a book where you have tremendous wisdom and you recognize that everything stays the same towards the end of his life. That's what it makes sense to say. That's what most commentaries say. Rabbi Stans would flip things around. He would say that he wrote Kohelet when he was young, and that he wrote the Song of Songs, understanding and appreciating the value of love when he was old. That's a different perspective, and makes sense too on a deeper level. But regardless, these are the 3 books of King Solomon that really contributed so much till this day. It's amazing is that he wrote them 3,000 years ago, and they're all so relevant today. Yeah.
So then it must be true, there's nothing new under the sun.
Right. Yeah. History repeats itself, as I say. I mean, look, there's scientists today that would tell you that a lot of things just are part of that endless cycle, right? Whether it's history, some say global warming is like that. I don't know about that. Some say, I don't know, but many things that are part of this cycle. It goes up, it goes down. Yeah. Okay. Any other?
Rabbi, King Solomon wrote the Eshet Chayil that we sing.
Right, and that's part of the book of Proverbs. That's the last chapter of the book of Proverbs. That's right. Yeah, yeah. And as William said, he was married to many women. I don't think he had a choice. He had to write something for women. So he wrote it. He squeezed into that book of Proverbs at the very last chapter. But yeah, but also very powerful. Rabbi Steinsaltz himself has a whole commentary on Eshet Chayil, which I have here. Here it is. This is another book of Rabbi Steinsaltz, The Woman of Valor. All right. Okay, let's continue unless again there's any other comments or questions.
I think before we
Yes,
look,
William, please.
before we look to the other side of the sun, I think we have to first clean up our own home. You know, the earth, the way we take care of our planet, human disasters, and in the meanwhile, billionaires are shooting these what they call phallus symbols, circumventing, you know, space. I think we have, before we look to the other side of the sun, we have to first do what's right on this side of the sun.
Right. No, I think it's true from that physical standpoint, right? Going to space and charging $17 million for it. I don't know how vital that is for all the goodness that needs to happen on Earth. But I think on a spiritual level, sometimes you need to go beyond the sun to create newness for what is under the sun, right? It's like it's like almost Albert Einstein would put it, that insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting different results each time. So sometimes you need to go above the sun to create some sort of sanity within the insanity of the earth. And so spiritually speaking, I think sometimes you need to go above the sun and then bring it back down under the sun to like you said, to create goodness here on earth. Yeah.
What's considered the heavens? Is above the sun considered the heavens? When we say that?
You know, all these are very abstract and esoteric terms. I think that what we're speaking about mainly is not just the heavens up there and wherever they may be, right? When by the way, when we say heavens, I think we're really relating to the spiritual realm of this world, wherever that is. And because it's abstract, there's really no definition to it. That's the essence of anything that is abstract. But I think that when we're speaking about heavens, we're also speaking about the heavens in us, that which is above the sun in us. It's, again, breaking those natural limits and going to a place that is way above the body, way above the physical confinement of the person. Going to a place that's divine, acting in a divine way. You know, I think that is the definition. You know, we've all heard of the definition of Chassid, Hasidic Jews, we say. Where does that come from? And the Talmud says something very powerful, that Ezo Chassid, who is a Chassid, which is a very, very noble title. Who is a Chassid? Amit Chased im Kono, which means one who does kindness with his creator. What do you mean? How do you do kindness with your creator? And what this really means is that God expects you, God knows you, and therefore he expects you to do A, B, and C. But you're so much in love with God that not only do you do A, B, and C because that's the realm of your work and that's the limit of your capabilities, but you also do D, and you also do E, and you also do F, and you're so kind to your creator that you go beyond the letter of the law, beyond your capabilities to achieve something great. That's a Chassid, someone that goes way beyond the letter of the law. And that's why Hasidic Jews were called Hasidic Jews, are still called Hasidic Jews, because instead of praying for 45 minutes, they could pray for 5 hours. Do they have to? No, but they go beyond the letter of the law. They're so in love with God that they break their limits. Or a Chassid can be someone who, instead of giving $1 to tzedakah, he gives $10 to tzedakah, however, you know, whatever your means are. You go beyond your capability. Amit Chased im Kono. And that's really the real heaven. That's where the real heavens can be found. It's the heavens in us.
Got it.
Kind to your creator. Beautiful expression.
Chassid is not someone who dresses like a Chassid, but who behaves like a Chassid.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well said. Yeah. Yeah. You know, I remember Rabbi Steinsaltz. It was here in Phoenix when he came to visit us. One of the 3 times he came, he approached someone who looked like a Chassid. I'm not going to mention names. And he said to him, you know, goats also have beards. That's all he needed to say to him. Goats also have beards. In other words, you can dress up, but you might just be a goat within. So it's not just the outside garments. It's what's inside. Absolutely. Yeah.
Think British dress Yiddish.
Sorry?
Think British dress Yiddish.
Oh, that's it. Exactly.
Hmm.
That's the tragedy, right?
Name.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There's a book like that also, no? I think so.
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Any other comments? Otherwise, we'll continue here with just one more paragraph. Okay, let's continue. Top of page 162. Does anyone want to read? Anyone?
I'll continue.
Go for it, Margot. Go for it.
Okay.
Thank you.
which are all vanity and striving after the wind, as interpreted by the Zohar on Beshalach, in the sense of ruination of the spirit. I have seen all the deeds that are done under the sun, says King Solomon, Ecclesiastes 1:14, and they are all vanity and striving after the wind, after wind. The Hebrew word used here for striving after, riyut, also translates as ruination, and the word for wind, ruach, also means spirit. Thus, the Zohar interprets the verse to say that the deeds that are done under the sun are all a ruination of the spirit, an expression of klipa, and the contrary force to the spiritual and the divine.
Right. And I think this, by the way, connects very well to the month that we're in, the month of Elul, because the month of Elul really should if there's one goal to this month, is that it should propel us to go beyond our comfort zone, to jump out of our comfort zone and do something that may have seemed impossible up until now in our eyes. And we have to remember that anything that is within the comfort zone, we might very well do just because it's comfortable. So we're doing them for us, not for God. How do you know that you're doing something for God and that is clear to all, that is evident that you're doing it for God? When you go beyond the letter of the law, when you don't have to do it and you do it nonetheless. And I think that's really the best way to prepare for the high holidays, where we say to God, all right, we may have been confined to our comfort zones, but now we're going beyond the letter of the law. And it doesn't have to be 24/7, right? It could be just one deed. I'm going to change this part of my life, this one moment of my life. Maybe the way I wake up in the morning or the way I go to sleep at night could be one little thing, and I'm going to go beyond the letter of the law. That's the Tanya speaks a lot about this much later on in the chapter 30 something, but speaks about how sometimes it can be expressed in the way we eat. And the Tanya mentions that control that we can exercise. Sometimes you're hungry and you want to jump on the food, but if you wait a few minutes and you control yourself to exercise that self-control, and then you eat, and then you will have exercised what the Tanya is speaking about here, going above the sun, going above those vanity of vanities, and being able to really connect to God through those 5 minutes of self-control. That's because it broke your nature, broke your impulses and inclinations. That sometimes is just might seem like a small step for man, but it's a giant step for mankind, as Armstrong would put it. But it's a giant step for God. It's that little thing that really enables us or elevates us to a place above the sun. So it doesn't have to be like world changing. It could be just small deeds. But it's those things that we have to think about during this month of Elul. Otherwise, if we remain in our comfort zones and we live the same lives as we did last year, then as he says here, it's ruination, wind, it's vanity of vanities, and nothing new really happens. I think that's why maybe Rabbi Steinsaltz would really, if there's one idea that sums him up, is that he always wanted you to do more than you did yesterday. He was, I think, the most demanding person I've ever met. I mean, maybe the Lubavitcher Rebbe was like that, but very few people are like that, demanding and demanding and demanding. Well, okay, that's great. You did this, no compliment. And immediately, well, what are you waiting to do that then? You did this, but now you have that waiting for you. But that's because he believed in your ability to be above the sun, to rise to a divine place. And he knew also that when you would do that, you would create newness, not just for yourself, but for the world around you. And I think that's really a thought that we should dwell on during this month of Elul. When the king is in the field, he's waiting us to hold his hand. And the way we can hold his hand is by taking upon ourselves acts that are above our nature, above our limits, that are above the sun. Then God says, okay, come with me to my palace. I'll give you a good and sweet year, Shana Tova U'Metuka.